All right, guys, welcome back. We're going to be going over point of interest, also known as area of interest, and what I use to identify my POI. So I use order blocks, breaker blocks, rejection blocks, and unmitigated wicks. All right, order blocks, breaker blocks, rejection blocks, unmitigated wicks. Right. The way that we use order blocks, or that we are going to use order blocks, is this way. Turn it off for you. We know that the order block is the last up candle before the down move and the last down candle before the up move. For example, here. Should I change color on this? All right, the last up move before the down move. All right, the regular order block, the way it's understood is price would come into and tap it, right? But for us to be a valid OB, it must take out liquidity. It must take out liquidity. It must have a purpose. The OB must have a purpose. It should take out liquidity in order for it to be a valid order block for us. If not, it won't be a valid OB for us. All right. And that goes on both sides, vice versa. Now, all right. What's a breaker block? A breaker block is simply a order block that was not respected and that it was violated. So let me give you a quick example here. All right. Let's say we're supposed to have an order block right here. And price should go up because that is the last sell candle before the up move. Right? So price was supposed to tap and go. But if the order block does not hold and it breaks straight through, that becomes the breaker. That would be known as a breaker block. It's an order block that did not hold, that was validated. Just flip it. It becomes the breaker. And the same thing vice versa. What is a rejection block? A rejection block is simply a candle with a long wick. That's one example. It can also look like this. It can also look like this. Just like that. It's rejecting from both sides. Here from the bottom, long wick. This is what a rejection block looks like. It is small body, long wick, and there is times that we get somewhat long body and a long wick like that. That's also a rejection block, also known as a FU candle. If you know what FU candle is, then that's what a rejection block is. The rejection block should also take out liquidity. That's the only way the rejection block will be valid for us, is if it takes out liquidity. Okay. So that's rejection block. Now, unmitigated wick. An unmitigated wick is going to be in a normal candle, right? It's going to be just the wick. The wick was not mitigated by any other wick. It never was. So it'll look something like this. Price would just create the inducement, tap into the unmitigated wick and then go just like that, right? The candle can look like that. Like a wick like that. Create the inducement, tap into the unmitigated wick and then drop. Just like that, right? That is an unmitigated wick, right? Now, does this wick need to take out liquidity, right? It doesn't have to, but I will prefer it to take out liquidity. I've seen it play out. If it doesn't take out liquidity, I see it play out good. It respects nicely. But when it does take out liquidity, it's even better. So Again, you got to combine everything together, but to put it in short terms, let's say, it doesn't have to take out liquidity. It doesn't need to. Okay, so no, it doesn't need to, but I will prefer it to take out liquidity, but it does not need to. As an unmitigated wick, it happens on a regular candle, most likely on a higher time frame candle. Okay. So now let's put these in some examples. So we have a strong low, then we have a weak high. All right, let's say we got an order block right here. All right, and then price is gonna come back and tap into it like that. But that's not how we are gonna take the order block. Remember, it must take out liquidity, which it did right here. And there must be liquidity formed underneath the POI. Remember, all of this is simply a point of interest. All of these are point of interest. There must be liquidity fed into the POI. So once liquidity is being fed into this, then this becomes valid. Only then it will become valid. Right? So whether it's internal liquidity or inducement, there has to be either or in order to make this a valid POI. So when we have a point of interest, there must be liquidity present in order to make it valid. If there's no liquidity, it's not a valid point of interest. So the same thing, vice versa. There must be liquidity to make this point of interest valid. If not, it's not a valid POI for us. Now I need to understand this. When there's a point of interest, right here, and price is coming down, and there's no internal liquidity. There's no internal liquidity at all, right? When price is coming down, you have to see how price is approaching its POI. Because if it's just coming in like this, it's not going to be a valid POI. So you have to see how price is being delivered and how price is coming into that point of interest. So if price is doing this, and there's a high right here, let's say, if it failed to take out this high, that becomes weak. That is feeding liquidity into this. So it gave it a reason to drop into this point of interest. All right, so you have to see how price being delivered. For example, is price coming down this? There's a trend on liquidity being built just above the POI. So if we don't see no inducement, no clear inducement, no internal liquidity, you have to see how price being delivered. All right, see what happens, see what it does. All right. So now, get some more details here. So when price broke structure here, right, we need to identify which is going to be the valid POI, and where we know that this is a order block. Right, the take out liquidity, so this is obviously valid for us, right? But inside of this order block, there's going to be small order blocks, or not small order blocks, but small candles like that, right? And of course, there will be some order blocks inside the candle, right? There's going to be small candles, maybe imbalance and all that. So which candle are you going to choose, right, for price to react from? anticipating that we're looking for a entry here and not just a zone to wait for price to react, right? So which candle are we going to use? Now listen closely. We're going to use the block or the candle that is lining up with the higher time frame POI. So what do I mean by that? So if this is an order block is a price level, right? So this red line, if there is, let's say in here, a breaker block right in there, if there's a breaker block in there, right? If there's a breaker block in there, let's say, and it lines up with the higher time frame, price level, key level, right? Either or. If it lines up with the higher time frame, key level, that's the one that you're going to use. That will be your refinement. Okay, that will be your refinement. Let's keep going because there's still a lot more to cover. So inside of a higher time frame order block, okay, inside of a higher time frame order block, there's going to be a breaker block. Inside of a higher time frame order block, there's going to be a breaker block. A breaker block. Okay. Most of the time. Okay, not 100%, I would say 90% of the time you'll see it. If it's not the 1 minute, probably in seconds. But there's going to be a breaker block inside of a higher time frame order block. Write that down. All right. So let's say we have an order block right here, right? And then we draw a line on, let's say, the body. And let's say that we want to enter right here, right? And we don't want to wait for confirmation. Now we're not covering entries, not yet, but I just want to show you. Let's say we have inducement right there. So I want to take the trade right here once it taps into here, right? And not wait for confirmation. How can I do that? The only way we're going to refine our POI, right? We're not going to move the green line. We're not going to move it. We're going to keep the key level. And all we're going to do is drop to a lower time frame. We're going to drop down to a lower time frame and see what's lining up with this key level right there. So let's say that in the lower time frame, we have a 5-minute order block lining up with the key level. Then that's what I'm going to use to enter from. Am I going to use this candle? Or am I going to use the price level, this key level right here? We're going to keep the key level where it's at. It's not going to be moved. The only thing that's going to change is your stop loss. Your SL will be above the refined POI, lining up with your key level. It won't be up here. It will be just above that new POI that you marked up. And then that's how you get those entries right there. Okay. Now, I hope you're still with me. I know it's kind of complicated. Don't worry, it will make sense. So now, let's continue going with the order block still. when we have a order block, most of us don't know what POI are we going to use. So let's say we have a POI right here, a POI right here, and a POI right here, all inside of this order block. This order block, let's say it's the 1 hour. And those purple ones, let's say it's a 5-minute. 5-minute POIs. Which one are you going to use? You're going to use the one that is lining up with the higher time frame order block. That's the one that you're going to use. That's why you see me catching insane entries and you don't know where I caught them from. It doesn't make sense to you, but now you're going to be learning how. We use the higher time frame blocks to get our entries. And all we do is we find to a lower time frame to adjust our stop loss. We use the higher time frame blocks to get our entries. We use the lower time frame to adjust our stop loss. Okay, that's how I get entries. If I have a block right here that's lining up with the higher time frame POI, and then all my rules meet, of course, we're combining everything together. It's not gonna be just one thing. Like I said, a constant itself does not work, in my opinion. There's inducement. I'm gonna confidently take it there. And I don't care about these. I ignore them. That's how I'm gonna take my entry. You're gonna learn throughout the course, right, that this is gonna be what we call a direct entry because we don't wait for confirmation. All right. So that's how we choose the POI. And the same thing goes for the rejection block. And the same thing goes for the breaker block. You just refine it down to a lower time frame. And it should line up with those blocks. And the same thing goes for the unmitigated wick. So for example, if we have a unmitigated wick, inside that wick, there's gonna be a order block. It's gonna be an OB. Okay. So right there. And that's gonna line up. Let's say the blue, that's the 1 hour, and the purple, that's the 1 minute. The 1 minute is gonna be a order block right there. Let's say a order block or a breaker block. So a POI. So my stop loss is gonna be below that right there. So my higher time frame block is lining up. All right, it's lining up right there with the lower time frame block. So that's the one I'm going to use, the one that lines up with the higher time frame. So my entry is going to be here. Stop loss is going to be right here. That's how we enter something called a direct entry, which you will learn later. But right now I need to understand how we're using these POIs. So far making sense? I hope so. Same thing with the rejection block and the breaker block. Okay, we need a higher time frame POI. Right? We draw our key level or price level, however you call it, because it's called either or key level, and it has to line up with a smaller time frame POI. And once you find that, your stop loss just goes on that smaller time frame point of interest. The only thing you move is your stop loss, not your entry. All right, now let's be real here. Sure, if you're like 1 or 2 pips, let's say for example, the POI is like right here, and you're like a pip away, then let's be realistic, and let's just move it just a little bit. It's not gonna hurt you. It's just a pip or 2 pip away. It wouldn't matter. Your stop loss will still be up here, right? It still lines up with the block because the broker data is different on every broker. So 1 or 2 pips won't hurt. All right, that's just the reality of it. It's not gonna be picture perfect like this. But your stop loss goes here, right? So Now, let me, all right. So let's say, for example, let's say we have a rejection block, right? This is important to understand. There is a order block in the open, a order block in the 50%. There's an order block in the open and an order block in the 50% of the wick. And this is commonly or common on rejection blocks and unmitigated wicks, right? Because it's a wick. There is a OB in the open and one at the 50%, open and 50%, right? On the smaller time frame. Yellow, let's say they're like the 1 hour time frame, right? Now, it doesn't have to be exactly OB. It can be a breaker block. It can be a unmitigated wick. It can be a rejection block, right? But mostly they're OBs, order blocks, right? But it doesn't have to be. So let's just call it a POI so I won't confuse you guys. There's a POI in the open and POI in the 50%. POI in the open and POI in the 50%. Okay. So when price comes up and taps the open and fails to take out the low, that becomes weak. That feeds liquidity into this point of interest up here. And then it drops. So this is why it's very important to understand and know, right? Know your weak highs, know your weak lows, understand what's going on, react to price, watch how price is being delivered, because you will have a perfect entry here, and then you go break even, and then it comes back up, it takes you up, like, why? Why'd that happen? Well, there is still opportunity for price to come up here, but it needed a reason, and it had a reason. It didn't have a reason before. It didn't have a reason before. And this takes me into another thing, which is we're always going to choose the POI closest to the liquidity, right? So if the inducement is formed here, the closest POI is this one. So that's the one that we're going to choose first, always, the closest one to the liquidity. Whether it's liquidity or inducement, the closest one. That's the closest one right there, the open. So now I watch price. I watch price. If price fails, then 90% of the time, guys, I'm not gonna say 100% because I don't want to say 100%. It'll come back up and tap into the 50% of the wick, which is the other POI above, and then it'll drop because now it had a reason to go up there. That's why you have to watch price. You react, we wait, we react, and then we make the move. We're not trying to guess. Okay. If there is no liquidity, let's say sitting below this POI, if there's no liquidity, then price will easily just blow through, pull back, then create a liquidity, then go on downward and drop. So this block will completely just not be valid. That's why we need liquidity. And this goes with all POIs, unmitigated order blocks, breaker blocks, okay? The same rules apply. The same thing. So, quick recap. There is a order block in open, a order block in the 50%. All right, and like I just mentioned, it doesn't have to be an order block. It can be a breaker block. It can be a rejection block, right? It doesn't have to be an order block. But I just know based on my back testing is most likely a block there, right? But it can be any. So like I mentioned, POI, all right, point of interest. Now, hope so far this makes sense. I know it's kind of a lot to take in, probably very new information for you, but we watched the video and it will start making sense little by little. This is basic stuff, believe it or not. So I'm trying to explain it in the best way possible, step by step. So yeah. All right. Now there's another thing that I do use as a POI, and that would be imbalance filled price action. So in short terms, IMB, also known as insufficiency fair value gap. So the way I use it, we have imbalance, right? This imbalance can be an entire point of interest, correct? So all of that can be a POI. However, what I want to see is price fill, and that's what you call imbalance fill price action. One price to fill. And this can also be considered a point of interest on a higher time frame. But like I mentioned, on a higher time frame POI, there's going to be most likely a breaker right here. So even though it's a imbalance fill on the lower time frame, it's an order block, it's a breaker, right? There's going to be something there. Instead of a higher time POI, there's always going to be something there. There's going to be a lower time frame POI. All right. And again, guys, the names don't matter. Breaker block, order block, it doesn't matter. They're all a point of interest. All right. They're all a point of interest. They all play the same role. So there's going to be a POI right there. So it will be imbalance plus breaker, let's say, breaker block. And then it drops. But I wanted to fill the imbalance. Right. And the reason I didn't mention this in the beginning is because, like I said, there's most likely going to be a POI regardless in the area, which will be a breaker or order block, right? Most likely it's a breaker, right? So, but once you see imbalance, preferably I would expect price to fill. And it doesn't always fill, it doesn't have to fill. It doesn't have to fill, right? But that's what we want to see it do. That's a high probable scenario. Okay. So now let's go and talk about the cons real quick. And by cons, I mean the negatives of imbalance. So the negative about imbalance is that, one, we know that price doesn't always gonna fill. Might go to the 50%, it might go just above it a bit and drop. And that's okay. That happens. There's nothing we can do, but there's one thing that you should know is that if the imbalance is huge like this, and if price is gonna take out this liquidity right there, these stops right there, right? It's gonna choose the closest POIs to liquidity. So in the smaller time frame, if you break it down, let's say 5-minute in there, you will see potentially a point of interest just above the liquidity. There's a high chance, I'm not gonna say always, but a high chance that price will tap into there and then drop. On a higher time frame, it's gonna look like it just came into the middle of nowhere. But in reality, it came into a lower time in POI. Remember what I said, the market is fractal, so is liquidity. All right. And you gotta be careful also when price comes up here. If it taps into a POI, fails to take out that low, that gave it a reason to now fill the imbalance. Are you starting to see how everything is coming together? How it's just clicking, which I hope it is. It's all coming together, right? Everything has a reason. It's part of a big puzzle, of a huge puzzle. But it's gonna take a lot of work, right? A lot of work to, understand all this and the real charts. So that would become the inducement for the imbalance, and then we look for shorts. And as you saw, I'll mark this up. That just created liquidity. Even a better reason, take this out of this, let's say, range to the downside, right? Now there is scenarios. Same thing with an order block. Where price will come into only the wick and drop. There is scenarios where price will come into the body, then drop. Okay. So there is a way to actually play this off. When there is imbalance, let's say, let me try this out better. When there is imbalance from here to here, and there's a wick, it's a high chance that's gonna tap into the wick and drop, and not into the body. When there is imbalance. When there is no imbalance, it's a high chance it's gonna tap into the body because the volume is in the body and then drop, right? But of course, regardless, they both need inducement or liquidity. So obviously liquidity is being formed right here, just below this wick. High chance of going to that. Like I mentioned, there's an order block and the open 50%. That's why it taps the open. That's why sometimes it taps the body. The wick. Okay. So again, you gotta see how price reacts. Comes in here, fails, it's a high chance it'll come to here, then drop. These are the cons. That's what I call cons. That is just something to be aware of. That of course cons be negative, but it's not really a negative thing. It's something to know because people only want to see the positive stuff and just win, 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 win. You have to understand the real life scenarios in the markets. You have to understand the negative, you have to understand the positive, both sides. So you won't be surprised if things like this happen. I'm showing you right now, I'm telling you right now, so you won't be surprised if it happens to you. Because it's gonna happen, right? What matters is that you understand the aftermath, right? So the same thing with all the POIs, all right? And again, everything is simply a point of interest for short term. All right. So now, where is my color? One last thing before we end this off here. We went over the order blocks, over the POIs. We went over how to refine them. And of course, if you're not going to refine them, then the entire thing becomes a point of interest with a confirmation in short. That's pretty obvious because it's a point of interest. But if you're going to take it directly, right, it has to line up with a lower time frame POI, stop loss on the lower time frame, that's a direct entry, right? And understand the con of this because it's going to be a direct entry. You have to be aware of how the market reacts. You have to be aware. Don't be surprised if this happens and then drops. You have to be aware, okay? You can do this, fail, go up, then drop. These two scenarios can happen. At the end of the day, it's either a yes, it meets my rules, or a no, it does not meet my rules. Again, all of this is basic stuff, guys. I know it may seem advanced to some of you or brand new to some of you, but if you watch this video, go to the charts, try to practice this because it's very important that you put chart time in. All right. So let's see what I've got to cover. Yes. One more thing. Let's go back to the block that we had here. There's the key level. There's the lower time frame. There's the SL. SL right there. All right. There's the, let's say, inducement. Price taps into here, right? And then price fails to take out, let's say, this low right here. then that gave it a reason to go up higher into here. Okay, and that is okay. There's nothing wrong with this. Right? Pretty much like the example I just mentioned, but there's nothing wrong with it hitting your SL. If you were not aware of it and it took your SL out, it doesn't mean this POI is invalid. It does not mean that. Okay, I want you to understand that you took a direct entry. Your entry was just not right, not the right time. Maybe you didn't see something. At the end of the day, it's going to be a human error. We can't blame the strategy. We can't blame the concepts. At the end of the day, it's a human error because I could have took a short here. I could have exited here and let's say made 5%, but maybe you took a loss and you blame it on the strategy. It's not the strategy, it's human error. Every error that you have is going to be human made. Like I mentioned, it's not an easy strategy, but the reward is going to be phenomenal. So then took SL here, and let's say that you were like, yeah, this is not gonna hold, and then I show it here again, then it drops. And then your confidence just goes out the window, right? So understand the cons, understand the pros of everything, of every concept, of every little detail, understand both sides, the positive and the negative. So that way, no surprise, or there won't be no surprises. So I'm gonna end it off here. That's all I have to cover about POIs. That's all I use to identify POI. That's how we will catch a direct entry. Even though it's not about entries, I still showed you how we'll catch one and how we refine our POIs. That's our only refinement. There is no other refinement of a POI. That's it. Higher time frame, key level, drop down, lines up with a lower time frame, stop loss on the lower time frame, POI. That's it. That's our only refinement. There's nothing else to it. That'll be it for this. Like always, any questions, let me know. On to the next one.